Today on Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
The sportos, the motorheads, geeks, sluts, bloods, wastoids, dweebs, dickheads. They think they're righteous dudes.
Want to learn from those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level? Best-selling author of Master the Art of Connecting and professional speaker Lou Diamond is here to connect you to some of the most inspiring and amazing people on the planet. Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another spectacular episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Today on Thrive Loud, we have the founder of Pikkal Co, an award-winning, AI-powered, data-driven B2B podcast agency in Singapore. He's a published author on the subject of the digital transformation of communication. He's up really late at night, and I'm up really early in the morning to make this global podcast happen. Thrive Loud listeners, world-traveling storyteller, author, and entrepreneur, Graham Brown. Graham, how are you today?
Wonderful. We're making it happen, despite polar ends of the world in time zones.
Yeah, we got polar ends in time zones. We got you in your amazing professional studio, and me jerry-rigging and pulling things together here.
Listen to the sound of us. Hey, audience, what do you think? He sounds good. He's on the road. How about that?
I'll tell you this, what we can do these days with technology is absolutely amazing.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Exactly. So Graham, who obviously has a spectacular sounding accent and listeners are already drawn in, has a really cool story. What I want to do, I don't want to rewind and go all the way to the womb, Graham. I kind of want to rewind to learn how this specific thing you're doing at Pikkal became your gig.
Yeah. Should we start there?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, it's great to be here and love what you're doing. I was actually thinking, Lou, just before this podcast, what does thrive mean to me and sort of my work and the people that I work with? And, you know, obviously listening to some of the episodes that you had recently as well, I'm thinking like to thrive really means to tell your story on your terms. That's what it really means to thrive, doesn't it? To find your voice, to be able to find a platform to tell your story. And really that's what I see podcasting as. I mean, obviously this is a podcast and people are very familiar with it. I think there's something more fundamental what podcasts can do for people and also for brands, which is, you know, enables them to get out there to wider audiences, but to do it in a very authentic way. And that's what we do. How we got there was a bit of a roundabout journey. I had many years ago been involved in the communications industry, telecoms as it was then, and sold a business in 2012. And then we went and traveled the world for a bit, 6 years.
That's nice.
And then, living out of suitcases. So I was doing what you were doing. I was doing what you were doing in terms of podcasts, you know, out of hotel rooms and stuff. And it just so happened that I started a podcast really to connect with people. And this was in 2017. I'd done a few podcasts before, but this was more sort of serious business oriented. I was kind of missing the hustle of entrepreneurship. Started a podcast, Asia Tech Podcast. It's still out there. It doesn't run anymore, but did 503 episodes. And, you know, as a result of doing it, it was quite early to the podcast scene, especially here in Asia. People started reaching out and saying, hey, Graham, I like what you're doing. How do I do that? And, you know, initially it's favors, isn't it? That this is what you do. Here's my time. And then I realized there was a business here. And I kind of got pulled back into business after sort of many years of, you know, semi-retirement, and ended up starting a podcast agency because it was just becoming too much to be a sort of a side gig and favors to people. And I realized actually there's a huge gap here that wasn't just people who wanted to start podcasts, but corporates. In particular, you know, these corporates who invested a lot in their brand, and they would do a lot on white papers and, you know, thought leadership reports. And now they were looking for new ways to connect with new audiences. So that's how I got into it, really sort of by the back door, to be honest. I didn't have this master plan, Lou. So I'm sorry if I disappoint your audience.
Well, I don't think most people do. And I think to your point about finding your own authentic voice and platform when thriving, those that thrive loud manage to move onward and upward based on the circumstances they're in. And they get to a certain point and they navigate to and through that. And here's what's interesting. And by the way, our listeners might need to understand this, so this could be a good little education. At what point did you recognize that it was more than just connecting with other individuals, that the podcast itself, as the white paper example used with corporates or other people's brand, was great content, these conversations or these programs were happening? When did that click for you? Was it in those 500 some odd episodes or somewhere?
Yeah, somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah.
There's a difference between doing it for yourself and then doing it for somebody else. When they're paying you, you have to do it beyond simply a hobby. At one point, there was a point where I'd moved to Singapore, set up the podcast studio. And the great thing about Singapore, it's a vantage point into 4 billion people as a market. Mm-hmm. It's got this, it's a very advanced city. You can reach India, China, Australia, all within 2-hour time zones, which is a key part of, if you want to do business across these countries. And I'd set up this podcast studio, and a friend of mine who was based here said after he'd come around, he'd be one of sort of the inaugural guests of the studio. I'll be a guinea pig for you, Graham. Test it out on me. So I invited him in. We did a podcast together, Asia Tech podcast. And afterwards he said, let's go and eat and do the Singaporean thing. So Singaporeans, they're big on food. So he took me to this local hawker center, which is where people dine out. You can go and get different kinds of foods, and you can sample all the different cultures and the foods of the region. So we went there, and it was not sort of in at the deep end of the hawker center. We went to sort of a more touristy one. It was Friday night. So we went to this place called Newton Hawker Center. If anybody's been to Singapore, it's probably one of the most famous ones. It's one of the oldest. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of stalls, packed Friday night. We get there, no seats left. We grabbed this last table, and then we went and got our food and sat down. And then this couple came across, and they said, can we sit there? These were like the last 2 seats in the house. And we said, yeah, sure. I moved my bag, and they sat down there. They went off and got their things, and they came back. And then we got talking. And like the guy who was sitting next to me, he was offering like chicken wings and, what do you eat? What's good around here and stuff like that. Typical kind of like ice-breaking conversation. Then we started talking about what we were doing here. He asked my friend who did medical devices. He showed them these sort of, these eyewear that you wear with sort of sonic enhancing capabilities for people with sort of a special type of, hearing loss. And then he asked me, and I said, I'm building this podcast studio here in Singapore. And he really got interested in that, asking me about it. What kind of equipment? What does it take? Who are you working with? And then after that, I turned to him and said, what do you do? And he said, I own an airline. And I took a double take at him, and I looked at him, and it was this chap called Tony Fernandez. Now, if you don't know who he is, because, he's quite a regional character. He's the equivalent of Mark Cuban in Asia. He's a billionaire. Right. He owns AirAsia. He used to own a Formula One team. He owns a football club in England. He's like a celebrity, but I didn't realize he was sitting right next to me. Anyway, long story short, he was sitting there for an hour, talking away, chatting over dinner. And I said to him, I realized he was leaving. His private jet on the runway was flying away. His man came and said, right, we're going, Tony. We've got to get out. I said, right, this is the last chance I'm going to see this guy. What can I pitch him? This is my last, one line. It's do or die now. Do I say, I want to sell you something? Do I say, invest in my company? And I said to him, Tony, I want to do a podcast with you. And he gave me his WhatsApp number, and then we made it happen. And the thing is they became our first ever corporate client. And so it's an extremely long answer to your question.
Yeah, no,
but my point is that I realized actually this is a very powerful and authentic way of connecting with people who normally you wouldn't get the time to get in front of. I get an hour with this guy in his place, like a couple of months later, and we get to do business together. Now think of that as a business development tool. That, Lou, is when I realized there is power in this.
Yeah. Someone one time told me that what should really be a bonus feature on almost any episode is either the stuff that happens before the red light goes on or what happens when the episode ends and the continued conversation thereafter. Because the real lessons in connection. The content that's being produced between me and you right now that our listeners are listening to is awesome and is great stuff and is a very conversational tone. But there's other stuff that just happens beforehand, the relationship, the understanding, those small world connections. And I always joke that that's literally how Howard Stern made his career, because it was never the interview. It was all the stuff that was happening before and around it and the logistics of it. But that's a great point. I think what it opens the door for great opportunities, but even more so, it creates an environment as a host or as a guest to really connect with the world, your purpose, your brand. And that's what we love to feature here on Thrive Loud, because there's two sides of every story. But in this one, what a great networking opportunity, and also a great way to grow the business through one conversation. Pretty powerful stuff there, man. And by the way, Tony Fernandez, I was looking him up. Where is he originally from? What's just a quick.
So he's based in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, but he grew up in England.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. The very short story is he was 14 years old and his dad said to him, look, pack your suitcase. We're going to take you to boarding school. So he turns up at the airport thinking he's going to fly, like from one city to the next. And they packed him on a plane on his own at 14 and flew him to London in the 70s. You can imagine what that was like for a kid in the 70s. That would have been scary. It's like flying to foreign country he's never been to before. Yeah. So he's an interesting character. He's lived, for sure.
When it comes to the business of podcasting, the business that you run, and obviously the great connections and the great content that's created, I want to say, like, happy accidents that you've walked into and maybe painful lessons you can share in the space that you deal with, because it's actually, for those who aren't familiar with what we do in the business of podcasting, there are many aspects of it. You obviously have a featuring component towards helping people get on shows, but what were some of those lessons, surprises, and maybe little pain points?
Yeah, I like the way you framed it. Happy accidents and painful lessons. That's life as an entrepreneur, isn't it?
Totally.
It's interesting with podcasts, there wasn't a playbook, was there? I mean, if you were around 4 or 5 years ago, even, there was no money in it, apart from maybe a few people who were the kind of Howard Sterns, the Joe Rogans, if you like,
right.
who kind of were first movers in their space. So there was no playbook, meaning that if you were to go into this space, there was no precedent. You couldn't say, okay, this is how you build an agency. This is even how you structure a deal, because it was very different from video production, very different from PR. In that case, there were a lot of painful lessons learned. There's a lot of time, as you would expect. If you're a first mover in any space, or you're in a new space, you're going to waste a lot of time on discovery. You need to kind of work out what the right client avatar is, who are the time wasters, who are the tire kickers, who are the people who really need this and can help grow your business. Because, there's a sliding scale, isn't there? There are clients, there are people who are going to be net negative in terms of your profit margin. And then there's those who are very profitable. So it's just really understanding that. The painful lessons have been you're trying to find the audience avatar, our ideal avatar of podcast clients. And what we've gravitated towards is corporate podcasts. There are a lot of people doing podcasts, what I would call consumer podcasts, B2C, the true crime, the history. Those are, all those wonderful podcasts like Serial or the NPR stuff. And yet there are not a lot of people doing corporate podcasts well. And it's a different ball game entirely. You have to kind of go in not with this sort of content mindset, which is what a lot of people tend to go in with podcasts. They tend to look at podcasts as a content problem. Really, it's not. It's a communications problem, which is a different paradigm altogether for corporates. It's not about producing amazing content. It's about how do we communicate authentically. Yeah. So you have to learn that the hard way. You can't go in and create a true crime type podcast for a corporate. You can if it was a sort of a marketing exercise, but most of these corporates are looking for comms, effectively thought leadership, effectively, traditional brand authority type communications. So you have to learn the hard way. And that took us a lot of time and a lot of exploration. I'm sure if we started now, it would be a lot faster because there'd be an us out there doing it and we would just copy them, right? So it would help us get up the learning curve.
Very true. And I actually wanted to now jump into this question because as you are talking to me from a very cool studio, in the middle of your little journey here, we had this, this global pandemic thing that happened. Let maybe talk about the shift that your business may have had to take because of it, or maybe more relevantly, the growth that actually happened because of it.
The pandemic certainly helped in that it sped up the transformation which was happening already. You know, the idea of going to a conference or, you know, having an analyst brunch, those kind of activities, which were very typical of B2B thought leadership, have then now become optional. So all that money, you know, getting your team offsite, or all that money, you know, hiring a booth in an exhibition, and, you know, all that travel, the hassle, you know, people now working remotely. So it's certainly helped that transformation. It's certainly given podcasts the necessary push in that sense. But there's been another aspect to it, Lou, which is that on the individual level, that we have the podcast agency which services corporates, but increasingly we're getting a lot of interest from people who are now looking at the podcast market as individuals and saying, like, I want to get my story out there. You know, I want to thrive. I want to tell my story on my terms. 4 or 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, if they said to me, you know, I want to do a podcast about individual journeys, or, you know, or something extreme, like, for example, garden furniture, I would say to them, look, you've got to go and start that podcast yourself because it doesn't exist. The real estate isn't there. But now what I say to people is, it's easier for you to guest on other people's podcasts. You know, that is because those hosts have curated, you know, like you've done, you've curated your audience with love, you know, over 200 plus episodes. And you've looked after your audience, you've looked after your reputation, you've communicated with your audience. And that's really, really hard work. A lot of people give up because they're just not good enough at it. So what I'm seeing now, what the pandemic has done is this big shift to people getting on other people's podcasts as a reality now. You know, there's 4 million podcasts in the world, 50 million episodes. There's something out there for your niche, for sure. I can say that. Whatever your niche is there as a podcast, and somebody's built an audience, even if it's 200 people. Now that's really exciting because that allows you these global stages now. And you could talk about any subject to informed audiences without even leaving your home studio.
Graham, I want to ask this question as it relates to where you are in the world and language, because obviously you're in a part of the world where English is not the primary spoken language, at least not just around from you. Are you seeing that kick up outside of, you know, English speaking for all the different languages, Mandarin, whatnot, in the vicinity of where you are in your space? Have you seen that?
Yeah, we have. We've seen a lot of local languages pick up. India is really interesting because there's 200 plus languages there. I mean, obviously Hindi's the big one, but you've got all these local languages. I was looking at some of the data recently, like languages that I wouldn't even know what they sounded like Bengali or Malayalam or Telugu in India. They have listener bases of 50 to 100 million.
Yeah. I'm
like, man, that's bigger than your average, or the biggest European countries. And that's bigger than most states in the US, right? So if you look at that kind of data, what's kind of happened at the beginning is they've imported a lot, like it always happens. They import all the ideas from the English speaking world and they inherit that content and then they localize it. You get these local variants of it. And it tends to be these localized variants don't talk to the big macro issues, but very localized issues. So they may be like comedy. There's a big one here in this region in Malay, which is spoken in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia in parts. And it's by these local Malay guys, and they're 3 comedians. They're a bit like Joe Rogan's, but they talk about really controversial stuff.
Right.
And, you know, they'll talk about like relationships and stuff that you and I might not think is edgy. But if you come from a traditional religious background, that's edgy. So I see a lot of that going on. And, you know, a lot more women, which is great, stepping up and doing podcasts in their local languages. So, yeah, I see a real flourishing, Lou. I see a real thriving. You know, people are finding their voice. It's exciting. You know, these people would normally be beholden to editors. You know, an editor of a local newspaper who is probably is probably quite risk averse, right? So that's exciting. I see that happening. It's like an internet happening, you know, in the world of communication.
Yeah. I love doing this, Graham. I want to ask you this question, which I ask most guests on the program. Curious to see where this goes. Look, you've been thriving in your career when you sold your technology business. In the last decade, you've been making podcasting a component of what you do, or more like half a decade, but you know, it probably feels like a decade to you. And you truly have been thriving, and the listeners here are hearing the passion of how much you love this platform and your voice. We all have days though when we're not quite kicking on all cylinders and we're a little off our game. Graham Brown, when you have trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek, or maybe which individual do you seek out to get yourself back on the thriving track?
That's a really interesting question, Lou. So who would be my North Star bringing me back? When we're all going to face down days, I seek a lot of solace in writers, authors. I read a lot, you know, so many great writers. You know, I think, for example, even just some of the traditional writers, like some of the American, what do they call the naturalists? People like Emerson, you know, write about the wild, or, you know, Walden, Henry David Thoreau.
Oh, wow.
These kind of things I would read. You know, and I just, you know, even stuff that takes me away from the day-to-day, not that I don't like the day-to-day, but it just kind of helps me refresh. Even like, I'm a big fan of Jack Kerouac, you know, and those kind of writings. Yeah, that's a big part of it. And I think though, it's just surrounding yourself with good people. Obviously having access to these books is like surrounding yourself with good people, but also podcast it's a way of having a network. For me, like, podcasting is like therapy. It's cheaper for sure, right? But, you know, just talking to people, you know, I loved, like Lou, I love talking to you. I love hearing your voice. You've got that gravelly radio voice, and, you know, you are passionate about what you do. You ask really good questions. And I think that's it. It's just being able to connect with people and talk with people in a way brings me back. That's what I love doing. That's why I'm here. That's why I went out from, you know, a sort of a semi-retired life and got back into business, because actually what made me happy was not lying on a beach somewhere, but talking to people and, you know, storytelling. So I think it's a way for me to kind of recenter, and it's almost meditative in a way. You know, if I have a podcast, talk to somebody, I feel empowered for sure. I've learned something, I'm challenged. I feel like I'm taken out of my comfort zone. I've made a connection with somebody. That's very empowering, I think, for us as humans.
Graham, let's do the admin part of the show, and then we're going to walk down Fun Street, if you would. Share with the listeners all the places people could find you, learn about your platform, your business. We will put it all in the show notes, but it gets more engagement when they hear it from you.
Yeah, go to grahamdbrown.com, and you can jump off there from any of my projects, whether it's podcast guesting or the agency. It's got to have a D in it. D for David, Graham D. Brown. Without the D, it's a wallpaper company. So you're going to get a very different experience.
You want to share with the listeners what the name of your company is, what you shared with me before we began the program?
Yeah, it's Pikkal, Pikkal. It's like Google, Apple, Pikkal. Some people like to say Pikkal, as if it's kind of a bit more exotic, but it's not. It's pickle.com.
Pickle. And listeners need to know it was the only 6-letter combination that was left.
Damn, Lou. I was going to tell the origin myth of the name Pickle, but you beat me to it.
Yeah, beat me to it. Well, it's excellent stuff. You ready to stroll down Fun Street with me?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. First of all, share with the listeners maybe an all-time or one of those movies that you love to rewatch, a movie that connects with you.
Yeah, so many. I'll do 2 if that's okay. Am I allowed to do 2?
You can do 2 today, Graham. At the hours that we're recording this episode, absolutely.
You're so generous. I would say one of the best ones I've seen recently, just to contextualize it into more recent movies, is The Joker. I really enjoyed that because I just think it's such a great example of storytelling and what it can do. How the aim of a director is not to tell amazing stories, but to make us empathize with the main character, and that is such a great example of that. How do we empathize with somebody who's very dysfunctional? So I think it's a masterpiece. But as for a story or a movie that I go back to, there's one which I watched a number of times, and I think it's inspired me. It's Into the Wild by Sean Penn, and it's based on a book written by John Krakauer, the mountaineer. It's a true story about a young kid who basically rejects all modern trappings of modernity and materialism, and then becomes a tramp, going west in America. And then eventually ends up in Alaska, where he's sort of living off the land. It's quite inspiring. It's all about, living life on your terms. And it's based a lot on, the writings of the kind of people I mentioned, like Jack Kerouac and Thoreau and so on. And I think, it's a very divisive movie. But I think the power of it is it's really about, success is a story that you can write yourself. Mm-hmm. So many people inherit that story from other people. And if it's a bit too deep for you, then watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is just such a wonderful movie. I think it's like, that is the sort of like the light version of it. But I love that movie. I think it's much more than a teen flick. Have you seen that, Lou?
Oh, I've seen it. I've seen it so many times. Oh, and man. even I want to even tell you that last week it was on. My wife was out doing something, and I was like flipping through. There were some sports games on, and I flip through and I see Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I'm in.
Oh man! If you're of a generation, it means so much to you. It wasn't like it's kind of couched as a teen flick, isn't it? But like the message in it is really powerful. I find that. I mean, there's some great one-liners in it as well.
All the John Hughes movies, they still stand today. And I've got children who are, one's graduating college, one's in the middle of it, and years ago when they were in high school, we watched The Breakfast Club. And when we did, I wanted to see if it was still relevant 30 years later for them. And sure enough, it was. It was actually 40 years later, I guess, at that point, Breakfast Club.
Oh man, is it really? Scary.
Yeah, mid 80s. So I guess it's not 35. And we were amazed at how so many of those issues are even more amplified today, and it was really well done. Just that. Oh yeah.
Well, it was filmed just in one scene, isn't it? Really, the whole thing. It's just like in a classroom. That's it.
One day, exactly. So, okay, let's do the speed round here, Fun Street, Graham, because I know you're very capable, and we'll be able to handle this with flair.
I'm ambushed. I haven't prepared this.
Oh, that's the best part about it. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question. And I want the first thing that comes to your mind. These are things that lift you up, that motivate you, that make you feel good, that basically that make you thrive. All right? Ready to roll?
Yeah.
Okay. Of late, a song that you love to listen to, or maybe one that pumps you up.
Oh, man. One song.
Just right now, not like a favorite song. I'm just a song of late that's in your mind, it's in your brain.
So what's on rotation on Spotify when I'm out cycling? I don't know. I mean, you can have the sort of the pumping, thumping stuff like Titanium, or I've kind of got back into things like Bob Dylan recently. So I do like
I'm starting
Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. So
yeah, I'm starting to see a trend here, or hear a trend, Graham, because we've got Jack Kerouac, we got Dylan, man, like very, very, very deep. I like it. I feel like
you've discovered. Yeah, exactly. That's right. I'm in the wrong place. I should be in the 60s, somewhere out west in the US, right?
Well, I guess you are technically on the Wild Wild West of podcasting in Singapore.
Mentally. Yeah.
Exactly. A favorite food that is not a dessert.
Well, I lived in Japan for many years, so many Japanese foods I absolutely love. I mean, everybody knows sushi, but I'm a big fan of sashimi, which is, like effectively the sushi without the rice. You could go into a supermarket, Lou, in like my local supermarket in Japan, and buy just this slab of tuna, which would be about, $20 anywhere else in the world. And it would just be like $4, $5 fresh. And I would just buy this thing and slice it up and just eat it on its own for lunch. I mean, I don't have to cook anything. That was living in heaven. I was living like a king, like these $20 lunches. No, I can't do that in any other country. But yeah, the food Japanese food. I mean, there's so many foods that I love, but yeah, South Indian food. I love all that. If anybody knows South Indian food, one of the best is this thing called idli, which is like a breakfast food. It's like a small, round, fluffy rice donut almost. It's not fried or anything. It's steamed, but it's really, really tasty. You have it with this dip, which is like a sambar, a South Indian curry. And you have it for breakfast. That's amazing. I love that stuff.
I was now going to ask what your favorite dessert was, but could that thing that you just described be?
No, that
dessert?
was
That's
savory.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a favorite dessert of yours?
A favorite dessert. There's so many as well. I'm pretty easy. It's got to be like black chocolate, like 90x% cacao, that kind of thing. I love that. It's probably more the caffeine actually than the chocolate that I'm eating. That's probably the reality, isn't it?
To me, it's the more bitter, the better. I'm a big dark chocolate.
Yeah. I think that's as you get older as well. Maybe your taste buds change.
Oh, they do. I recently tried to take a bite of a sugar cereal that I always wanted as a kid because my parents wouldn't let me have sugar cereals. And I probably had it when I wasn't supposed to. And I had it. I could not even begin to crunch through it. It was just too sweet. Couldn't deal with it.
You didn't dig the pink and the purple hoops anymore.
No, definitely not. No. The Fruit Loops just didn't have it for me. Okay. An activity you wish you did more of?
Well, obviously, I have to say things like exercise. I'm a big exerciser, big into competitive sports as well, like Ironman, triathlon, and so on. But nice. I don't do nearly enough as I should. But I think more, on a more basic level, is just reconnecting with people. As you get older, I think that's something that there are regrets there that I wish I had spent a bit more time with that person. Especially if you're traveling around, you kind of lose touch with people. And I really value those. So when I do go back to the UK, for example, or I'm in US, I will make the effort now to connect with people and just with no agenda. People that I met in business and I just got on with. It's like, let's meet up for a beer or a coffee and just chat. Whereas years ago, there had to be an agenda, isn't there? I've got to meet to do business or talk about something. So, but I regret not doing more of that because we're still in the busy of life. Yeah. And Ferris Bueller said, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it. So I'll take his advice. An activity you wish you did less of? Well, is this free for public consumption? I don't know. So what do I do less of? Eating black chocolate. That's one. I think that's probably it. I think as an entrepreneur though, I don't know how you feel about this, Lou, is that, I would love to be the kind of entrepreneur that's just kind of celebrating and really thriving in the moment. But there's always that kind of monkey brain in there, the lizard brain, which is like worrying about things, which is an energy in itself, isn't it? It's a driver. Like it forces you forward. It's that momentum to achieve more. But I'd wish I could just kind of worry less about those things and just sometimes, a small victory, just celebrate it rather than, oh God, what's next? I've got to do this. So I think that's kind of the hard wiring. And it takes work. It takes a lot of inner work to kind of override that. Graham, as a global fan of so many different things, of foods and life, I'd actually like to know this. What is the sporting, the sport or thing that you actually love to watch? Like one of those, is it a football club? Is it a triathlon or race tennis? What is the thing that you love to watch as a fan, as a spectator? I watch all sports and I find them interesting. That's really strange, isn't it? So I can just find any sport interesting. Like I watch like a tennis game, Wimbledon, and I'd watch just somebody hitting the ball, but the way they hit the ball, just getting into that, that sort of zone that you can sort of sense somebody's in. So I love all that. I love all sports. Well-rounded. I like it. Yeah. I don't know. Like what do you suggest that I watch more of? Is something that you think's underrated? I'm very much like you. I love watching. I like watching anything. I mean, literally, the only thing that I have trouble watching is, I used to be auto racing that I had a problem watching, and then I watched on Netflix Survive to Thrive, the F1. The features of the F1. I had no idea how amazing it was and how much complication and effort and like the drama, the documentary
Those who
drama.
want to watch it is incredible. It's unbelievable. And when you
You're
realize
right. That's it, though. I think that's it, Lou, isn't it? Once you know the people, the heroes,
Yes.
and their stories and their backstories, you can connect.
No, it's
That's
so
what makes sports interesting. Actually, just watching all the mechanics of it is just pretty basic. But once you kind of know that guy and what he's been through, it doesn't matter what sport it is. That makes it really interesting.
That's the truth. That's why that one of my favorite shows is that show HBO does Real Sports. They still do it. I don't know how many years they're featuring the stories behind the stories. Last question here, Graham. If you could snap your fingers, and as a world traveler, I want to know this. You could snap your fingers and you could be anywhere in the world. Where are you?
That's a terrible question to ask me, Lou, because there isn't one answer.
No, well, there's got if you right now I could snap my fingers in the moment. It doesn't have to be your favorite place. It could be like, where do you want to be? If you can go somewhere right now, where is that, Graham?
Right now, we're going to the Himalayas, Lou.
Okay.
And we're going to go to somewhere like one of the remote hill villages in the Himalayas, like Mustang, or, up in the snow-capped peaks, Everest Base Camp, maybe, go and explore. I love all that. That's really, to me, remote, exotic, and there's a lot of culture there. I would love to. I mean, I've been to the Himalayas before, but not all of it. So, and it's a big place. That would be one. But as a condition, I would like to have another option. But there you go. That's another podcast, I guess.
Graham Brown, the man. He's got a pickle for entrepreneurship. That's the only way I could put it. But everyone, check out all the links, websites where he is. Obviously, you could see how much he loves having great conversations. Truly a pleasure to connect with you here today, my friend.
No, pleasure was all mine. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep moving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Check us out on the web at thriveloud.com and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Thrive Loud. And check us out on the Good Pods app at Thrive Loud, where you can follow, listen, and connect directly to Lou and all of the Thrive Loud episodes. Thanks for listening.